Hi, I'm Dr. King Owen here with another APUSH quick review. This one is for period 4, 1800 to 1848. So we're going to see a great deal of economic change, the rise of the Jacksonians, as well as a large number of reform movements that will reshape Americans politically and socially. Let's begin. Pretty big theme of the period 4 time frame is expansion of democracy through and with the creation of two stable political parties. We'd had two political parties back in the 1790s, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, but by the late 1820s, we will get the creation of the Democrats, North and South Democrats, as well as in the 1830s, the creation of the Whigs, who will last until the 1850s. The ideas of these two parties are still pretty similar to the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans that came before them. The Democrats believe in states' rights, very much in favor of agriculture, laissez-faire approach. Government should pretty much remain hands-off. At least the federal government should when it came to the economy. And that's pretty similar to the Democratic Republicans of the 1790s. The Whigs are kind of Federalists 2.0. There's a historian who's actually chronicled how many of the Whigs are children of Federalists or former Federalists themselves. And the Whigs don't mind using federal power. They favor industrial growth, and they like using government to build roads and canals, to promote banking, to protect American industry from, competition abroad. That means during this time period, these two parties are going to debate pretty extensively a lot of economic issues like banking. Should the United States support a central bank? So we will see that bank revived. The first Bank of the United States dies in 1811 and it's revived in 1816. Andrew Jackson's going to famously come along and kill the national bank. There'll be debates about internal improvements. Should we build roads? Should the federal government pay for those, or should states do that instead? And Andrew Jackson, once again, will veto an internal improvements bill, saying the federal government shouldn't really build a road if it's only going to benefit one state. As well as the issue of protective tariffs. Should we protect American industries from foreign competition? And Southerners, particularly South Carolina, will have something to say about that when they have a nullification crisis in 1832 and basically threaten to not follow the laws of the United States. These economic fights really can be boiled down to, should the federal government have the power to tie together the U.S. economy and to promote economic growth, or should that just be a state policy? The parties that are formed in this time period are national parties, so they compete nationally. Democrats are national, there's a North and a South version. Whigs are national, North and South. But there are regional blocks of interests focused on the needs of the regions. So the North, very industrially minded, urban minded. Let's promote the growth of cities and railroads and towns and roads. The South, very agricultural, pro-slavery. And the West, a lot of the West will very much favor internal improvements, because then that would give them a road that they could connect back to the East in order to sell their products. Or a canal, for example, like the Erie Canal famously. The two political parties also preside over the expansion of democracy in the United States, as many states pretty much just grant universal white male suffrage. So all men, regardless of property, can vote. This is going to come at the expense of other groups of people. African Americans in many places will famously lose their suffrage rights. Like in North Carolina, the Constitution of 1835 takes away free black male suffrage. Native peoples will also see that they are not part of this white male expansion of democracy. And Andrew Jackson famously will say, we need to remove them. Let's kick them over across the Mississippi River into what would become Oklahoma. As the United States expands and adds territory, particularly through the Louisiana Purchase, it's going to further facilitate this desire to create a white republic by getting native peoples out of the South and the North. And so those lands can go to white settlers. This will see us by the 1830s get to the Trail of Tears, where Andrew Jackson supports the removal of native peoples like the Cherokee to Oklahoma, which will be a horrific and deadly journey for many as they're forced to give up where they had always lived and known. Economic growth is not just a political issue in the 1820s and 30s. It's also an issue for America's future in terms of how Americans would think about industry and banking and commerce. Historians have coined the term market revolution to change this shift in the way people think of themselves and the economy. It's a contested and debated term since Charles Sellers came out with his famous book on the market revolution. But in general, the idea is that more Americans are using credit. They are tied to the market, so they buy and sell things in the market, which is really done in the colonial period, but hey, you know, minor details. That more people are dependent on manufacturing and the buying of manufactured goods as new technology is improving the ability of people to create shoes and clothes and clocks and other things here in the United States. This is going to make more people market-oriented, according to Charles Sellers and other proponents of the market revolution. They're going to think more in terms of cash and credit, producers and consumers buying and selling things for the market, as well as being a worker who works for a boss. These factories were small, as many historians will point out. They're not huge, with the exception of, Lowell is one of the first really large developments in factories, Lowell, Massachusetts. And places like Lowell will hire women and children. Samuel Slater's mills in Rhode Island will hire entire families. But eventually that will shift on over into hiring migrants by the late 1830s and early 40s. The creation of this factory world, small as it is, widens the gap between the rich and the poor. And we notice that under Jackson, President Jackson's America, the rich get richer, the poor do get poorer. Factory work will also tend to separate home from work. Many scholars have noted this, in that factories originally start as extensions of someone's house, but eventually they will become separate buildings, and the person will have their home in a suburb somewhere, so that you don't live and work in the same place. That will lead to an idea of separate spheres, that the workplace is male-dominated, the public area is male-dominated, and home is the place for women. It's the place where domesticity rules and reigns. So we're going to get the creation of a sort of separate set of spheres in which men and women are supposed to live and act out their appropriate gender roles. This market revolution is not just a northern thing, as many historians of the South have pointed out in recent years. The expansion of cotton production in the Southwest, and the extension of market relationships through the expansion of slavery will spread the market revolution across the South, as the South depends on the North for credit and for shipping, and race-based slavery will expand to places like Alabama and Mississippi and Texas. Opportunities for working in this market revolution world, this growing economic world, will draw migrants to the United States. So largely German and Irish migrants in the 1830s and 1840s will come to northern cities to get jobs in these new factories that are being formed. And that will later, as we see, lead us into the rise of an anti-migrant sentiment or a nativist xenophobic movement. Our third theme is really kind of an outgrowth of these rapid economic changes, which historians have pointed out create some anxiety about the future for a lot of Americans, and that anxiety is eased by a second Great Awakening. Now we know that the expansion of religion occurs in the South a little bit earlier, the 1790s, 18 teens. In the North, it's more 1815 to 1830 that this second Great Awakening takes off. And it is going to bring a lot of Americans into a vision of Christianity that is going to emphasize their individual right to choose their destiny. The Second Great Awakening's emphasis on the power to transform yourself, to perfect yourself, is going to help Americans feel better about all these economic changes that seem to undermine, their hope of a better future. It's also going to lead a lot of Americans to join reform movements. And these reform movements will be based around the idea that you and I together can voluntarily associate, make a group, and fight for some change in society. We can make America great again. Whether that's through temperance, sort of getting people to stop drinking, or through helping people respond to slavery and the threat that it poses towards the United States. Many of these reform associations, these voluntary associations, believe not only in perfection, I can make myself better, I can make society better, they believe in moral suasion. I need to convince you that you also can make you better and you can make America great again. So notice that their emphasis on moral suasion is I have to persuade you to do the right thing. Some people join utopias, so we get utopian experiments to improve self and improve people so that they can make the perfect society. We will see women's rights movements. Temperance is the most successful of all of them, so getting people to stop drinking is the most successful of the reform movements of the era, and there are a whole lot of them. Anti-slavery will be the one that eventually will get us into a civil war. During this emphasis on reform, we're going to see some rising tensions within slavery itself, where African Americans will use all kinds of resistance to the institution of slavery. Some revolts, so Charleston, 1822, Virginia in 1831-32, we will see these revolts not be successful, but they sure as heck will, scare a lot of people, especially in the South, into thinking about the future of slavery. More successful for opposing slavery will be things like running away, faking illness, day-to-day kinds of resistance that just show you're trying to take back a little bit of your autonomy and your freedom. This will eventually get us into a civil war as we see this mounting anti-slavery pressure continue as African Americans and white abolitionists together will keep putting pressure on the South. Finally, women will take this newfound belief in perfection and moral suasion, and they will tackle it onto their supposed moral superiority that has been imposed upon them in the cult of domesticity. The idea that women are supposed to be submissive and dependent on their husbands and pure comes from a sort of sense in which the woman's sphere of the home is morally pure. And that's why women will teach their kids about Jesus and doing the right thing. They don't really need an education for that, like under Republican motherhood. They just need to know what God wants. Women turn that on its head and say, if we are in fact more moral, then we should use our morality to clean up this world. So you'll see women joining the anti-slavery movement. You'll see women using their moral voice in temperance. But men are not comfortable with women doing this. And they often tell women that if they speak in public, they de-sex themselves, and they should really only do very minor kinds of roles in these reform movements. So women decide eventually by 1848 that they're going to challenge these gendered assumptions. And so they will call for a Seneca Falls Convention where they will call for the right to vote, as well as for all kinds of other changes in the law to give women more of a voice in the public, the right to education, more rights for their children, rights to divorce, because they want to be recognized as not this weaker, submissive sex, but a fully morally equal, independent group of people who are just as good as men at understanding the Bible and proclaiming the goodness of God through the world. This time of reform and perfection and making yourself better matches up to a movement in literature known as Romanticism. Romanticism sees the good in people, has a very positive outlook on human potential, in that humans can be all that they can be. It tends to celebrate nature more so than the urban world. The urban world is often a scene of vice and corruption for humans. But out there in the forest and the trees, that's where we affirm our goodness and God speaks to us. So we see that in art, in literature, such as the Transcendentalist movement, which looks to America's human potential for self-improvement. Many of these Transcendentalists will be interested in utopian movements. Some of them eventually will sour on all of this talk about goodness and awesomeness, and so they will push back against the idea that everything's perfection and it can all be perfected here and now. Our last theme is sectionalism. As America grows economically, as it grows politically, and it grows socially, we're starting to see the creation of some regional identities that are being solidified as specific places where Northerners believe X, Y, and Z, Southerners believe X, Y, and Z. The North's becoming very much urban, industrialized. You will find more social reform in the North, more utopias in the North, more of these movements to fix and perfect society. The South is retaining its agricultural, rural, pro-slavery point of view, which really, that's nothing new. It had been that way since before the Revolution. And the West is seen as this place where it needs internal improvements. It needs to get Indians out of the way, so we need to shove them across the Mississippi River, and we need to expand and add more land into the United States in order to keep growing, keep improving. The two political parties, the Whigs and the Democrats, tie these regions together, so they are interdependent on each other. You know, Westerners sell produce to the East. The North handles the South's banking and commerce. The South provides the cotton. Northerners can turn into textiles. So they are interdependent, but they also see themselves as having specific needs and wants. The issue of slavery is starting to divide, though, the North, the South, and the West. As we see abolitionists pushing against slavery, Southerners are pushing back, saying slavery is a good thing. Slavery is the right way to go. So the morality of slavery and its relation to the U.S. as a whole is starting to be questioned. It's a feature that makes America great. There are attempts at compromising over the issue of slavery, most famously the Missouri Compromise, which says we will admit one slave state, we'll admit one free state, and thereby attain some balance. And then we will draw this line across the United States, 3630, north of that, no slavery, south of that, slavery, in an attempt to essentially say, we're going to make a resolution about the future of slavery, and everybody will kind of go, okay, this is a good thing, right? You know, smile, yay, awkwardly. And that will hold for some time. But we can see even in the 1820s and 30s, the coming of future conflict. It's just going to take, you know, a good 40 years to blossom into an actual civil war. So that's been our long look at period 4, political parties being solidified, a market revolution, so economic change, reform movements and religion, and then finally the solidification of sectional identities. Join me next time for another quick review in 4 slides.